How's everyone doing today? It's a very rainy day on the West Coast in Canada right now. So, so today, what we're going to be talking about, okay, is layers, actions, and masking. But I really want to spend a fundamental amount of time on layers and masking before we talk about actions. Sunny and windy in Texas, fair enough. Raining in Wisconsin too. Cool. And so Gary's question too, we will talk about that. I have a pretty good example here, I think, today, which talks about isolating an object in an image to sort of remove other parts of an image from it. Beautiful day in Colorado, raining in Melbourne, Australia. As you know, raining in Seattle, nice, nice. Likewise, Wayne, likewise. Seattle's a 2-hour boat trip away. Okay, so actually before we start too, let me make sure that I turn on, everyone can see my screen okay, I'm hoping. I'm just going to turn on that mouse click effect because I found it to be quite useful. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so mouse click is on. Can everyone see that mouse click is on? I just want to make sure people can see my mouse okay. It's just a little blue indicator that pops up. I'm getting yeses. Okay, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to open up just a blank image in edit mode. To make a blank image, I mean, I already have one right here, but we'll just delete it and make a new one. I'm just going to go to File, New, and Image. And I'm just going to make just a white background. That's fine. And let's go with, let's actually make this image 3000 pixels by 3000 pixels. And all I did here was literally go to File, New Image, and I'm just going to allow myself to set the size. And that's fine. 3000 by 3000 at 300 dots per image is okay. Dots per inch, rather. There we go. And then it'll open it up. There we go. So edit mode, one of the most common questions we get in regards to Ultimate, right? Because Ultimate and Professional both have edit mode. And a lot of people are confused in regards to the differences between develop and edit mode. And in regards to Professional, right, which has the filter menu, but it doesn't have layers, it does have a lot of similarities to develop mode. They're very similar. And in many ways, develop mode's really coming up there as a tool that is providing you a lot of the same filter options. But where Ultimate is concerned, Ultimate is Ultimate's edit mode is very different because of layers. And so that's primarily what we're going to be talking about today is the concept of layers and masking. So what makes edit mode different is that we can take parts of images and combine them together. And that is what layers and masking is sort of the main fundamental aspects of those is what it's going to teach. But before we start the workshop, I sort of just want to break down what we're actually seeing in terms of the UI, because in the case of this workshop, there's actually a couple UI elements that we're not going to focus on. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hide them during this workshop so that there's less visual clutter. But in edit mode, it's a very simple layout. So obviously our preview is in the center. If I was to have opened up an image, it would be present here. In this case, we just created our own image and it's displayed with a white layer in this case. Also, what you see up on the top here is the toolbar, which we'll be using a little bit. And these just contain various selection and shape tools, fill tools. There's a quick filter menu right here. And then there's actions, which we'll talk about hopefully at the very end of this workshop. At the bottom is our film strip. Film strip is super useful. So all the film strip is in this case is it's a representation of the same folder that we saw earlier in manage mode. So when I go into manage mode, for example, I'm just seeing this as the film strip. It's just this same folder, which is really useful for combining images, which we'll talk about momentarily. And then the last visual element that we see is this filter menu. And so as it pertains to an earlier question, I believe it was Roger asked, what are the benefits of using adjustment layers as opposed to applying the same effect on an image layer? Well, the main thing to understand about edit mode, right, is that the adjustments that we're going to be focused on using layers and masking, these are non-destructive changes to an image, because when we go to save this image as a ACDSee file, All of these metrics, all of these sort of information that is contained within layers and adjustment layers, all of this information is saved. And then so when we reopen that file in the future, it really allows us to work completely non-destructively in the same way that develop mode is non-destructive with its slider controls. So that is truly non-destructive, and that is a huge element of why what we're going to talk about today is a very still a really revolutionary tool within ACDSee. Layers function a little bit differently. So for some layers, they might offer you a little bit more control over your editing functions. I mean, the thing that I can think of right now that might be the case would be like Light EQ might have a couple other tools. But the things to keep in mind in regards to this whole layer menu is two things. A, it is not the same as these adjustment layers. Okay, they're fundamentally not the same. And what we're going to talk about is why. And the second thing to keep in mind in regards to all these layers is that they are destructive. So when I say destructive, I will give you an example of what I mean. Let's just navigate to an image that has some visual information in it. So I'm just going to navigate to this Statue of Liberty image here. And I'm going to make two of the exact same adjustments on this image. The first one I'm going to make is this exposure adjustment. Okay. So I'm just going to go to the exposure in lighting controls here. I'm going to click on it. And I'm just going to crank the exposure, okay? And I'm going to click done. So I've made an adjustment a filter change to this image. And let's save this image. I'm going to go to File and Save As, and I'm just going to save this landscape image. I'll save it as a version 2 and save it as a JPEG. And what you'll notice is when I have gone to save this image, right? I actually lose my my undo history. If you'll notice up at the top here, the undo and redo sections are grayed out, which means that I can't go backwards to prior to that exposure adjustment. In fact, actually, the only thing that makes this, I could have permanently altered that image if it wasn't for the fact that I saved the original, right? So that information, what I've just done there with this filter is a destructive change. So in the sense that there's no option for opting out of that experience, or there's no option for being able to go in and make it different adjustments to it or correct the adjustments that I've already made. Now, if I go back into that same image and we'll do the exact same thing, we're going to make an exposure adjustment and we're going to crank the exposure. So I'm going to go to the exposure adjustment. And one of the things you'll notice that we'll cover momentarily is that a little box pops up right here that contains exposure information. And this time we're going to, let's totally crank the exposure in the opposite direction. It doesn't matter for this, example. But the difference of what I'm going to do is instead of saving it as JPEG, I'm going to save it as the first file that comes to mind in Ultimate in edit mode, which is the ACDSee file format. So I'm going to save this landscape image. I'm going to save it as landscape version 3 and as an ACDSee file format, not a JPEG. And the reason why is because this file that I talked about is not non-destructive versus those filter adjustments that we changed earlier, which were destructive. So I'm going to save this landscape image as a version 3. I'll click save. And then what I'm going to do is I'll go back to manage mode. And you can see that I have my first landscape image here. I've got my JPEG that with the exposure cranked on it. And then I have the ACDSee file format. Notice the difference right here and here. The ACDSee with the exposure also cranked, just using an adjustment layer versus a filter. So if I go into this file, keep in mind it's an ACDSee file, and bring it into edit mode, you'll see that even though I've navigated away from the file, and if you go up to the top, you'll notice that I still have a grayed out undo and redo history. The difference is that this ACDSee file contains this exposure metric. And you'll notice that this exposure, right, this adjustment layer, the exposure is bottomed out, just as we did earlier. So if I was to adjust this, reset this, say I move it all the way forward, right, to plus 100, I do the exact same thing. I save my image and keep in mind that it's still an ACDSee file. And then I navigate away. And then I navigate back into this file, right? I'm still going to see that same exposure, and the exposure is editable. This is totally non-destructive, right? I'm not making a adjustment that is hard saved to the original image. All I'm doing is making an exposure adjustment in this case that contains some values that we can change in the future, provided that it's saved as an ACDSee file. So earlier when Roger asked, what are the benefits of using adjustment layers as opposed to applying the same effect on an image layer? That's it. The difference is, on a fundamental level, the difference is that adjustment layers are editable in the future and that they're non-destructive. Now let's give a different scenario, okay? Say you never need to come back to that same image again, right? Let's say that you're going to make a perfect first pass masterwork series of adjustments to your image, and you have perfected this workflow, and you never need to come back to an image or ever edit it again in the future. You know exactly what you're going to do, and you just nail it the first time, right? Well, if that's the case, then you don't technically need to use adjustment layers, especially if you're not working with layer order or masking. If you're just making simple color adjustments to your image or exposure adjustments to your image, then yeah, you can get away with just using the filter menu. It's just if you ever want that non-destructive function, that non-destructibility that you would experience, say, in develop mode, that's where you'd use the adjustment layers. The difference that we're going to be talking about today is that what I was said earlier in regards to layer order. So in regards to the destructive versus non-destructive, hopefully for everyone, we've established that edit mode can be non-destructive in a fundamental way by using adjustment layers and by using layers, okay, rather than applying filter adjustments, which are destructive. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to I'm going to move away from this image here, and we're going to simplify and start the conversation in regards to understanding layers, how layers work. And then we're going to come back to something that I think is really useful and also will help in regards to Roger's earlier question about there is a way to sort of assist ACDSee with keeping we can use filters in a way that I think is still destructive, but it enters the realm of non-destructiveness. So we'll talk a little bit more about that too. So Brian asked, comparing an ACDSee file to JPEG, is it a huge file size difference on saving? It's not that different. It really depends also on the size of your JPEG image. But when you go to save an ACDSee file, the same size JPEG file size, right, is applied. It's just now that there's all these like numerical values that are attributed to that ACDSee file. So those numerical values are like things like, okay, when I set exposure on my image, how much did I increase it? How much did I, you know what I mean? Like in regards to our exposure example of plus 100 or minus 100 or whatever, like this is the actual metrics that are being saved within that ACDSee file. So I think what you'll find, Brian, is that they're not, it's pretty comparable. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to navigate away from this image, and we'll navigate to the empty file we made earlier. Randy asked, can you do masking to adjustment layer? For example, yes, we're going to cover that. Yeah, Randy, absolutely. Are there changes made? Are the changes made save an ACDSee image, or is the image saved with a rate? Oh, okay. In regards to an ACDSee file type, I believe that if you want to understand the backend, I believe that the ACDSee portion of that save is saving those metrics to a sidecar file. I believe that is how it works, Gary, although I'm not totally sure about that. Bud asked, how does this process affect raw files? Okay, so edit mode is not a raw editor. So when you open up a raw image in edit mode, what it's going to do is it's going to create a really high sort of, what's the word for it? It's going to translate your image into an editable file type, because raw files are non-editable. They're basically like proprietary. And so what you need to do is in ACDSee, when you open up an edit mode, it's going to basically convert it to a high-end TIFF file. And then you're going to be working on that TIFF file. And when you go to save that image, your original raw file is not going to get saved over. That doesn't happen. You're literally just going to be save asing, in this case, creating a new file. So edit mode is a bit distinct from develop mode, and the develop mode is more designed to make non-destructive changes to edit to your raw files, where edit mode is just going to do its best to convert it to the highest visual presentation it can, keeping as much as the pixel information as possible, but then you're going to save an ACDSee file, which is going to be editable in this case, or you're going to save it as a non-editable file format like a TIFF or a JPEG or something like that. A writable, sorry, is the word I'm looking for. But ultimately, yeah, no, it's going to do its best to convert that file into a different file format. You're not going to save a raw file in this case with the edits. That's not how that works. Okay, so let's transition to now that we have a sort of understanding of editability and non-destructiveness. We're going to transition to understanding layers. And I think the first thing I want to do is let's get rid of the filter menu because we're not going to be touching on it too much more. So I'm just going to use this button up at the top right-hand corner to just hide it. All it does is hide it. I'm not actually getting rid of it entirely. Oops, that's weird. Oh yeah, there we go. Oop. There we go. And then I'll just hide the bottom panel as well. Oh man, it's being stingy right now, isn't it? There you go. So I'm just going to hide the two of those. And so just what we're going to focus on is the layer panel here, and then the tools up at the top. So the tools up here in the layer panel. So in my layer here, I have a white image. And in order to sort of better understand layer order, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to fill this image with a color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click up at the fill tool up at the very top here, and I'm just going to pick a color. Let's pick like this salmony sort of maroon color here and click OK. And I'm just going to fill my entire layer with that color because there's some concepts that we need to understand. So my layer one, let's just call this red. I'm going to rename it. So red is our only layer on the layer panel. You'll notice that basically on our layer panel here, we have this hide button here. And what this hide button does is it literally takes this layer and hides it from view. That doesn't remove it. It's not being removed from our layer order, from our layer stack. It's just simply taking a moment to hide this, this layer from view. And we can click on this button to unhide it or to preview it basically. And this button is important because when you go to, if you have hidden every layer in your file and you go to save as a ACDSee file, right? When you open up your image, all of those layers will be hidden and nothing will be presented to you. So just keep in mind that when you go to save your image, it does account for this button being turned on or turned off. And one of the major takeaways from turning this, rather hiding our red from view, is that we see that there's this checkerboard that appears in the center of our preview pane. And this checkerboard may seem innocent, but it's actually really interesting information. And it tells to us that the current size of our document is currently being presented as a transparency. So when you see this checkerboard, the takeaway from that is that it is a transparency right now. So there is no pixels that are presented to us currently. Those it is totally transparent. Now, the interesting thing about this layer here is there's a destructive way to showcase that transparency, right? And the destructive way to showcase that transparency is to click on the eraser button. And what we're just going to do is we're going to use the eraser to erase a portion of our image here. So when I go to erase that line here, I have made a destructive change to this layer here. And then also noteworthy is that I have completely removed that red portion from view. So what we see here is that these pixels are being presented to us in red, and then we have a whole line in our image where the pixels, there's no pixels in that part of the image. And this is distinct from hiding the image. And the reason why is because they're two separate functions. I am erasing something from view or I'm hiding the layer entirely. Now, this isn't ideal, and this is sort of where we're going in regards to the conversation in regards to masking, because masking allows us to hide specific parts of our image, like in this case, the line straight through our image, but it allows us to hide it in a way that is non-destructive. But before we get to that, let's just undo this silly looking line. And let's add a new layer to our layer order that contains another color. So if I can draw your attention to this layer panel here, underneath the adjustment layers are a variety of different options. The first option allows us to add a file as a layer, and I'll just quickly showcase what that does. I'll click on it and click on this landscape image and go open. And what is presented to us is this landscape image, right? And it allows us to set the landscape image. You'll note that we're now in the move tool. So what the move tool wants us to do is wants us to set these bounding boxes and determine where we want this file to be placed. And then when I go to commit that layer, the layer is established and my landscape image has been placed over my file. So in this case, all I've done is click on this add a file as a layer. And when I do that, it adds a new file, in this case, an image of this landscape image of this mountain. It adds it at the top of my layer order. So just put a pin in that. That's something we're going to talk about in a bit here. But that is a cool function of edit mode, is that allows me to place this layer, which in this case is another image. The next button on our list is really the one that we want to talk about, which is the add a blank layer. But when I add a blank layer, you can see that what it's going to do is it's going to add a layer. And note that the preview here, in this case, this blank preview, it has that checkerboard function on it. So what it's telling me here is that this is completely transparent. There's nothing within, there's no visual pixel information in this file yet. So even though it's placed over top of my red label layer here, there's actually no information in that file. So we'll get to that in a moment, but just keep note that this is a transparent file above my red layer. If I click on my red layer and I go to duplicate my layer, what it's going to do is it's going to do exactly that. It's going to make red one copy one. And in this case, this is a duplicated layer that contains the exact same information that my first red layer has. It's no different. And then we have the ability to add a layer mask, which we'll talk about it in a little bit. And then the last thing that's really worth noting in this layer order is just the delete function, which allows me to delete this copy, for example, or to delete this blank layer, for example. So I've created another blank layer, and what we're going to do is we're going to take this layer one. I'm going to rename it. I'm going to name it blue. And we're going to fill this blue layer with blue. So once again, I'm going to navigate to the fill tool. I'm going to click my foreground picker up at the top here, and I'm just going to click a blue color right there. And I will fill that layer with blue. Okay, so now we have two layers in our layer order. One is blue and one is red. This is where things start to get kind of interesting in regards to masking and layers. But one of the first things that we got to understand before we understand the other concept is that the first item on our layer order, the one that's at the very top, is the one that is being presented to us, barring any form of masking or transparency or that sort of thing. So what this means to us is that the first item on our layer order takes priority. It is the most important layer. Now, where you may say like, oh, well, how do we change that? How do I make my red layer the one that takes the most priority? And the answer to that is as simple as moving the layer around. You can see that I'm clicking here on the layers and moving them. And as I do so, what's so cool about this is that it's presenting to me the topmost layer, right? Now, the other thing about this that is kind of valuable to understand is that both of these layers are shown, basically we're seeing both of these layers. They're not hidden from us. So if I was to take this blue layer and let's keep it on top, and even though it's kept on top, I'm going to hide it now. And you'll see that because my blue layer is hidden using the preview, the eye icon here, it goes to the next item in my layer order and presents that to us. So when I hide this blue, I'm seeing the red element that's beneath it. And I'm just going to ask a really quick question right now. And that question is, if I hide this red icon, what do you think will be presented beneath that? So I'm just curious if people are following along here in regards to that. Let's see. Albert said blue. Randy said checkers. Otto said transparent. Nice. Okay, so a couple of you have got that. Exactly. So this is great. When I hide the red layer, you can see that the checkers exist beneath it. So for those of you that got it, well done. And we'll explain this in a little bit more depth as we go through. But yeah, so hiding layers presents the thing that is underneath of it. And at the very, very base of all of these layers is no information at all, which is why we're getting this checkered transparency layer, okay? So now let's do something kind of cool. So we've talked about moving the layers. That's one way to interact with layer order, okay? But there's other ways to preview information through other layers, okay? So one of the most obvious ways, or one that you might be already familiar with if you use things like exposure and filters in general, is that filters often come with opacity, okay? So when we apply a adjustment layer or a filter that has the option in regards to opacity, it enables us to do this as the following operation. When it is set at maximum opacity, it is fully opaque, which means that all the pixels are being presented to us at full value. So we're seeing 100% of the pixels. If I reduce this opacity slider to the very bottom here, so if I zero it out, so if I take my blue layer and lower my opacity to 0, it's very similar to having clicked on this hide icon. Because what I'm telling blue to do now is, okay, blue, all of the pixels in this layer, I want them to be fully transparent. So I want the opacity to be set to 0 value. And so what you can do with opacity is obviously you can functionally set your layer to be hidden or shown as the example we've provided. But what you might notice is because it's a slider and there's all these different increments on the list as we go down, if I lower this somewhere in the center, oh, interesting. We've created a combination of colors now, right? So we've created blue and red together, which create, in this case, I don't know, this particular type of purple. It's very almost like a, like a royal looking purple. So let's explain that one more time. So I have my blue layer over top of my red layer. My red layer is at full 100% opacity, which means that it's being presented to us. All of the pixels are being presented in their full values. This blue layer, which we've now set to a 50% opacity, is being presented to us in the following way. This layer is saying to us, Adam, I am going to present 50% of the pixels in this image. In this case, the image being the blue color that we're seeing. So if I present 50% of those pixels to you, it's going to get a combination. So 50% of them in this case are going to be transparent and 50% of them are going to be fully opaque. This isn't exactly how it works, but for the purpose of explaining this, this is going to work just fine. And so what happens when 50% of those pixels are transparent, then it's going to combine it with what it sees beneath that. So the layer beneath it. So when I go 50% transparency, yeah, I'm getting this purple color because we're combining blue with red. We're combining 50% of this blue pixels with 100% of these red pixels. And we can increase that value. So I can get like a darker, more blue purple if I go up to 76, for example. And I can actually even make it more red, like kind of like a bright pinky looking color by going down to like 22, for example. So opacity allows us to play with these two colors, one being in this case blue, on top. And let's just, for a moment here, let's also just stop and I'll just take this red layer and I'll move it above this blue layer here. Both are currently set to 100 opacity. And let's just change the color of this red layer to yellow. Let's change it to like a more golden yellow, actually. There we go. So all I did was fill this layer with yellow. And if we were to do the same thing, I bet you we're going to get this weird. Oh, that is actually really weird. It's actually, interestingly enough, it's not green, but I wonder why that is. There's definitely a reason for that. Maybe it's because it's on top. There we go. Nah. Anyway, either way, if I put this this yellow layer now on top, I'm still getting a combination of these colors. In this case, it looks like it's a little bit more gray. And if I increase it, I'm getting this brighter color. And if I lower it, I'm getting it closer to blue. So as we combine and work with opacity in this case, we're getting a variation of the color that appears beneath it. Okay, let's turn this back to red and let's showcase, now that we sort of have a functional understanding of that, let's talk about, let's start talking about masking. So I'm just going to make sure the opacity is 100 on both of these. And maybe before we do that, let's just note one other way to combine parts of our image. And to do this, what we might do is we might use the add a file as a layer. So I'll just add that file we added earlier to our layer panel. And I'm just going to place it on my image here, place it like that, and click commit. And you can see that as I've placed this landscape file, notably that landscape is placed at the very top, which means that it's the one being presented to us, barring any forms of transparency. Jason asked, please review how you got the blue into a new layer. Sure, let's do it one more time for fun. I go down to adjustment layers, add blank layer, and let's choose a different blue this time. So I'm going to go to my color picker and I'll add a cyan. I'll click into the cyan spectrum here and hit OK. I'm just going to make sure that I'm using my fill tool and I'm going to fill this layer. Make sure that I've clicked on that layer. I'm going to fill it with that color. And let's rename it to cyan. And let's talk about the last function and the last way to combine layers that I was talking about. So we've talked about opacity. So if I lower the opacity on this cyan image here, you can see that it applies through my image. And what we see is 50% of these cyan pixels mixed with, in this case, our landscape image that is set to 100% opacity. So we're seeing our cyan layer, 50% of our cyan pixels, and then 100% of our landscape image. And the images beneath it, the red and blue layer, are not presented to us because this landscape image is not hidden and it is not set to a lower opacity. So currently it is taking visual precedence over the red and blue layers. If I was to change that, say if I was to reduce this to 50% opacity, now we're starting to see a little bit of the red in there as well. We're seeing 100% of the red underneath and 50% of the landscape image and 50% opacity of the cyan. Now, the cool thing about if I set those values all to 100, and currently we're just seeing presented cyan as the topmost layer with 100% opacity. If I go to this box that appears to the left of this, what I can do is I can do something called a, I can blend mode, or I can blend these with the images that appear beneath it. So if I take this cyan and I apply a blend of multiply, you can see that this is a specific method and has a specific rule to it that blends it with the image that appears beneath it. So if I dodge, I get a different effect. If I burn, I get a different effect. If I use overlay, I get a different effect. And I'm not going to talk about these because this is a whole workshop in and of itself, all of these specific blend modes. But just note that what this box does is it enables us to blend with the image that appears beneath it in a variety of different ways that, that change its relationship with the way that it presents the pixels. So hopefully, just to summarize this, the three ways that we can hide an image from view or combine it with the layers that appear beneath it is to do the following. Change the blend mode, right? Change the opacity, or use the preview button to hide that image from view, right? So these interact with that layer order. Owen says, you still have the color filler instead of an icon showing. How do I change that? Color filler instead of an icon. You mean that I have the fill tool active instead of the arrow icon, the move tool? You can click on these up at the very top. So I can change that at any point. In this case, the move tool is probably not the tool we want to use. We want to just use the hand tool because it's the most basic function. But yeah, you can keep the fill tool active. It's not going to change anything when we're interacting with these layers. But you can just click on the tool itself to change it. So now we're using the move tool, which is the default. Okay, so let's now talk about masking. Okay, so masking is, we're going to mask with these basic images. So I'm going to delete the cyan layer using the bin tool right here. And I'm going to delete also this landscape for now. We're just going to go back to our red and blue layers, and we're going to talk about the concept of masking, which is where this gets really fun. So ultimately right now, the takeaway should be is that two things. Layer order matters. So the layer that is above your other layer, that matters. And the other thing is I can blend that layer or hide that layer using the tools that I mentioned earlier, the blending mode, the opacity, or the hide icon. But that general rule of layer order matters is always going to apply for all of these situations. So masks, enter masks. So we talked earlier about the masking button, which appears at the bottom here, just after the duplicate button. So when we add a mask to our layer, what it's going to do is it's going to put this little thumbnail that appears to the right of my image. So this thumbnail enables us to hide pixels from view or show pixels, basically. And masks have a certain methodology. They have a certain method by which they present that information to us. Now, remember earlier when I used the erase tool, I used the eraser itself to erase a specific line in my image. And I said to you, this is a destructive change. Well, we're going to showcase how you can erase a specific part of your image in a non-destructive way using masks. Before we can do that, we need to understand the methodology that I was talking about earlier. So this mask is white. So we have our red layer, okay? So that's our image. And then we have the mask to the right of it. Now, this mask is white, and that indicates to us what it's doing to this image. So the rule here is that when your mask is white, it's turned on. It's presenting that visual information to you. So with my mask being white, it's saying to this red color, present it. Show me the red. Show me the red. If I invert this mask to the inversion of white, which is black, okay? So when we're working with masks, we're only ever introducing black or white to that mask. If I invert it, what's going to happen is it's going to tell my red layer to present no information. So do the opposite of what I just did. It's a binary function. It's either black or it's white. And so it's saying to my red color, don't present this. Now, this is really interesting because what we were talking about earlier, right? We're talking about opacity, which reduced the pixels in my image. We're talking about blending, which blended it with the image beneath it. And we also had this hide button. And previously, when we hid our image, it made it go away, right? Like it was gone from view. It was just the image that was presented underneath. And when I asked you earlier, I was like, what's beneath this red layer? And all of you said checkered, right? Well, that's because there's nothing being presented here. Well, masks enable us to have a layer presented to us. In this case, it's shown. We still have this eye icon on. So this layer is definitely on, but it's hidden everything from view using this mask. So when I take this layer and I invert it to white, it presents all of that information to me. So with this layer, this red layer is now turned on again. So on, off, on, off. So I have a mask over top of this red and it's currently turned off. This is important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going down to my blue layer. I'm going to click on the layer itself. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to add a layer mask to this blue layer. Okay. Now, this blue layer, okay, has this mask to the right of it, and it's turned on currently. So I'm going to invert this mask, this white mask, to black. Okay. And I'm going to ask you once again, what is going to be presented when I go to do this? Because we have a red layer that's turned off, and we're about to have a blue layer that's turned off. So what visual information is going to be presented to us? Yes, nice. You guys are getting it. Okay, this is really good. So when I go to invert it, I'm getting that checkers again, right? Because there's no information that's beneath it. So well done. Pat yourselves on the back for knowing that. This is a very complicated function. This is not, I mean, that's why I'm trying to go to the bare start from the building blocks here. But this interaction is complicated, and you guys are getting it. So good for you. So I have two layers that are both turned on currently. I'm seeing them, but the mask is telling me otherwise. Let's turn these layers back on. So these masks interact with tools. So the tools being the toolbar up at the top. So a fast way that we don't necessarily have to use this invert button when we go to interact with these masks. We don't necessarily have to right click on them either to set them as black or white. We can also use things like the fill tool and the brush tool itself. So if I swap these colors, or rather if I set my foreground color to black and I use my fill tool on the mask itself, note that I'm not doing it to the layer, okay? If I fill the layer with black, it will be black, right? But what I'm doing is if I'm filling the mask with black, it's going to turn the layer off. And same thing is interacting with that invert tool. So boom, I inverted it, and there you go. My layer is once again hidden from view. So it's turned off, right? Black is turned off, white is turned on. Okay, so we haven't actually really interacted with the cool portion of this yet. I'm just going to turn it back on by filling it with white. But that it is, we can use things like the pen tool, right? We can use this brush tool rather, and I can fill this with black, right? And I can write my name, for example. And this is kind of unique because what I'm doing is I'm drawing on black, right? In this case, over top of my mask. And I'm getting information here that is presented to us that correlates to what parts of my mask I have turned off on my red layer. So let's have a look over at the mask thumbnail itself and review that. So in my image, again, all of this red is still being presented to us. We know that because it's turned on, right? We're using the eye icon here. But if we look at our mask, there are parts of my image that are hidden from view, right? That are being hidden from us. And we know that because black in this thumbnail indicates the areas we're hiding. And the areas that we're hiding in this red color are being presented with the color that appears underneath of it. So when I write Adam in this mask, that's being shown as a it's being shown as a transparency in this layer, and it's being presented the blue that exists beneath it. The cool thing actually is I can take this mask that I have written Adam on, and I can invert it, and it'll invert what I've written. So note again, the mask thumbnail, black is turned off, which means if that's turned off, it's looking to the layer beneath it, which is the blue. And the white in this case, that's my name, that's the text Adam, that's actually being presented to us as on. So the red layer here is turned on. So as we draw, so Susan asked a good question. Let's fill this layer with black again. Actually, let's just remove this mask and add it again. So I'm just going to take this mask and I'm going to click on a button that we haven't seen previously, but it's added after the mask button, and it allows us to delete a mask. So I'll delete it and I'll add a new mask. So what Susan asked is, what if you wrote Adam with yellow? So there's a couple things that are going to happen. I'm going to take a yellow color, okay? And you'll see that when I have a mask selected, Susan, okay, so I'm selecting the mask here. And when I select yellow, what I'm actually getting is a variation of gray. So when I write Adam in yellow, which is being presented to us because we're interacting with this mask that works in a binary of black and white, it's interpreting this color that isn't black or white as something in between that, which is a gray. So when I write Adam in yellow in quotation marks, I'm getting a light non-black, in essence, interaction with my mask. I would say this is a really good question, and basically what it showcases to us is that we're mimicking the opacity function by choosing a color that isn't black or white. What I would suggest to all of you is to not do this because I think it confuses how masks work on a fundamental level. When you're working with masks, use black or white, that on or off function. But the question that Susan's asked here is, when I'm interacting with a color that isn't black or white, I'm going to get a variation, rather a gradation between on and off, right? We're going to get parts of these pixels depending on the color selected. We're going to get parts of these pixels that are going to be interpreted as on and parts of them that are interpreted as off. So the reason why I've only been working in black and white so far is to simplify this interaction immensely. But this is a good question, and it's a great thing to ask. Now, the important note is that as soon as I click on the color itself, okay, you'll see that when I do that, look up over here on the fill tool. When I click the mask, it's interpreted as gray. When I click on the layer, it's interpreted as yellow. Okay. Now, if I was to draw the name Adam over top of my red layer, yeah, I mean, it would be yellow and it would be on my layer, but it would also be presented to us destructively, right? Because I'm now drawing on the actual layer itself rather than the mask, which is what I'm trying to teach here, is that if we want to be non-destructive, we want to be interacting with these masks. Susan, hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so let's go back to when I was working in black and white. I'm just going to undo through a bunch of these, and I'll add a new mask. And let's just add, let's just add my smiley face for now. So I have my layer. And again, once again, I'm referencing that thumbnail. And I'm seeing that thumbnail, and that thumbnail is presenting on and off to me. Black is off, white is on. And I can change those values, right, by drawing on with either black or white, or I can change those values by inverting them, or I can change those values by setting the mask in a certain way. So even if I have drawn on, right, in this case with this mask, I can set the mask as white and it resets it, right? But the cool thing about this is if I draw on black, draw my smiley face, and I save this image, go down to save as, right? If I save this image, layers, as an ACD file format, click save. It's going to write the file down, and I can navigate away. I can go back to manage mode. I could be working on another file in edit mode or something like that. And at any point decide, oh, I want to go back to my smiley face image, bring it up in edit mode. And the cool thing, right, is that here's my image. There's my mask, still able to interact with that mask, still able to set that mask whatever color I like. So far, this has been an abstraction, right? Because we've not been working with an image that actually contains any visual information other than color. So we want to transition this understanding of these masks now to, I want to transition this to an actual image, right? Heaven forbid we work with an actual image. And let's talk about it. Because we sort of have a fundamental understanding of how masks interact now. Let's actually apply this to something that we might actually want to do rather than just playing with red and blue colors. Let's do that momentarily. I'm just going to pour myself some more tea. One moment. Okay, so I'm going to go back to manage mode. And let's open up this balloon image here, my landscape 109 image. I'm going to open up an edit mode. And you can see that my landscape image is presented in the same way that our filled layers were, right? In the sense that I can see my landscape image here. And when I go to add a mask, like we were doing earlier with those red and blue layers, you can see that a mask appears to the right of it in the same way that we understand. I'll just delete that for now. So what I want to do here, okay, is I want to use what we've learned in regards to masks to isolate our balloon. So I'm going to take this balloon, and then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove the background. So I'm going to get rid of this sky. I'm going to get rid of the moon, and I'm going to get rid of this dune, what appears over here. Maybe it's another balloon, but I just want my balloon in the center, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to place a whole new sky underneath of this layer. So I'm going to make this portion of my layer transparent, right? And then I'm going to place something new underneath of it to give it a whole new sky. Okay. And this might sound complicated, but it's actually not. It's really easy. And I'll show you how. First of all, maybe I'll open up my film strip. So I'll just unhide that again. So you might not know this, but when it comes to your film strip, in the same way that you can click on the add a new file as a layer, and when you do that, it brings another layer into your layer panel, right? Well, the other thing you can do is the same, is you can bring files into your layer using the film strip. So if I wanted to put the Statue of Liberty on my layer, if I'm going to take that, I'm just going to drag and drop it onto my layer panel, you can see that that image is added, and then we're allowed to move it and decide where it goes and then commit the layer. And that puts that layer on our layer panel, which is now above my landscape image. And once again, we learn the same way that we did with those colors earlier. When my landscape of this image of the Statue of Liberty is above my balloon image, it's taking precedence barring any other opacity, blending, or masking. So if I was to take my balloon image, move it above, boom, there's my balloon. It's all I see because it's at the top of the layer order. If I reduce the opacity, same rule applies. Now we're getting a combination of 50% of the pixels in this balloon with the Statue of Liberty that lies beneath it. If I was to blend it using the multiplication tool or I don't know, darken or overlay, now I'm combining images. I'm combining this image with the image beneath it. Once again, if I was to hide my image, it's hidden from view. And lastly, and most importantly, when I add a mask, that's going to enable me to hide this image from view as well in selective parts if I wanted to. So in my image here, I can invert my balloon mask, right? In the same way we were doing with colors, and boom, that image mask is now black, which means it's turned off, right? Which means that the rule is being applied and that I'm seeing the image that appears beneath it. If I was to take my brush tool, for example, and brush on white in the area that looks like it may contain a balloon, boom, I'm brushing on a section of my image, which is now referenceable with my mask thumbnail. My mask thumbnail is showing me that when I brush on white, I am brushing on that layer, and the black portion of our layer is turned off, and the white portion of our layer is turned on. So that's how we use things like the fill tool and the brush tool in interacting with masks. But what if we want to make a selection, right? What if I want to make an accurate selection of my environment? How do we interact with that in masks? Here's where it gets a lot of fun as well. So I'm going to delete this mask on my balloon image. I don't need it for right now. And let's make a selection. So I will draw your attention to the selection panel here. Selection follows the move and resize functions. So selection is brush selection, polygonal selection, rectangular selection, elliptical selection, lasso, and magic wand. Okay. And each of these selections have different, what's the word for it? Specialties. Okay. I primarily work with brush selection, polygonal selection, and magic wand selection because they're, in my opinion, the more precise methods. For this example, let's use the magic wand tool. Just as a poll right now, how many of you are familiar with the concept of the magic wand, what it does in edit mode? I just want to get a feel for that. Basically, no, yes. Okay, so there's maybe enough no's that it's worth talking about it on its own. Gord asked, does layering work the same way for placing text on an image? The answer to that is yes, Gord. But for the most part, some people are familiar with it and some people aren't familiar with it. So we're going to explain the tool first, and then we'll explain how it interacts with this landscape image and masking. Okay. Just for the benefit of those that are unfamiliar. Okay, so the magic wand tool is a tool that allows me to select like-minded, I guess would be a good term to use, like-minded pixels in an image. So when I click on the magic wand tool, and maybe what we'll do is, yeah, let's try this. So if I was to select the sky right now, and I currently have the wand set to color. So what it's going to do is it's going to select based on these criterias. So brightness contains the tone, so how dark or how bright something is. Color searches for hue. And RGB actually searches, in my understanding, it searches for a combination of the two. So you can decide whether or not you want to focus on tone, color, or a combination. For this portion, let's just use RGB. It makes the most sense. Threshold changes the degree of what you select. And in terms of the magic wand, this is actually should be kept quite low, I think. If I was to select this yellow band here with a threshold of 8, let's see what happens. So if I really zoom in here, it's being super, super, super restrictive in regards to what it's selecting. If I increase my threshold to 16, I'm getting a bit more of that yellow and RGB values being selected. And then what it enables me to do is go through and add more colors to that selection. Now, if I increase the threshold, let's see if it actually does a more selective job here. So basically you can go through and you can select the pixels that you want to add or remove from your active selection. So currently our active selection is being indicated by this red color, okay, that we see over our yellow bands here. If I go to select and overlay options, I can change that to marching ants if I want, so we can see the active areas that I'm selecting. My preference is to keep it to this selection highlighted, and we can adjust the color if we want to select it with a different color. For example, we can just select it using black, honestly, and then it'll showcase what parts of my image I'm adding to my active selection. So the magic wand tool, in combination with threshold and your actual wand selection, basically allows you to select parts of your image. Yeah, and then you can also select connected colors, which if there's any color that's similar to the areas that you've selected, it'll just join them together. If I go to, you'll notice that there's these 4 tools at the top here. If I click on the first one, what it does is if I was to select this red color, it's going to reset my selection and just focus on that red, or just focus on that yellow, or just focus on that kind of cyan color here. If I click on the plus, which I had previously, it's going to be additive. So it's going to add those colors to the selection as you click on things. And then if I select on the minus, like we could minus this blue portion, we could minus this blue portion, we could minus this. So you see that I'm removing from that selection. And then the preview shows us exactly which pixels that we've selected that are going to be applied to our mask when we mask them. So that's how the magic wand tool works. I generally keep it on this additive selection method, and then I go through and I add what parts of my image I want. And then I work with something like the threshold to make an active selection. I'm just going to change that back to red, I think. There we go. Red being our active selection. Now, if I was to click on a different selection method, for example, the brush selection tool, it works a little bit different in that it's not automated in the same way that the magic wand tool is. The brush selection is truly selecting where our brush moves, right? So that's one way of selecting parts of our image. Okay, so far though, this is kind of an abstraction because we're just talking about active selections. We're not actually talking about what we can do with them. So let's just take a step back and actually talk about what we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're going to make you're going to use the magic wand tool to select the sky in our image, just the sky, not the balloon. And we're going to try to do the best job that we can to select the most pixels at the same time. So I'm going to deselect that and I'm going to increase my threshold to 50. That's selecting too much of the blue, so we need to bring it down slightly. There we go. And what I might do actually is take out that particular color by doing this. Yeah, maybe we try brightness instead. We want to get just none of the balloon, just the color. So play around with this. Nah, that's not going to work. Maybe if we just do color. I just don't want any of the balloon. That's all I'm trying to get here. That's so close. So close. So I'll just reduce it to 12. Let's reduce it to 8. I'm just playing around here at this point. There we go. Boom. Okay, so I played around with a bunch of the tools here. I decided on color because it did the best job of selecting out the sky without incorporating the balloon. And I've decided on a threshold of 8 because 8 was able to capture without combining the blue in with the sky here. So we did a fairly good job. Let's just keep this active selection. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make a mask with this active selection. So I'm going to leave this as is. We can adjust this in the future if we need to, but I'm just going to make sure that my landscape image is selected. And I'm going to go down to the add layer mask and add layer mask when I have an active selection involved, in this case, this red selected area. What it's going to do is when I go to click on it, it's going to make that active selection into a mask. So let's just deselect for now because we don't need this selection anymore. So as you can see here, if we reference our landscape image, right, our balloon here, you can see that the black portion of our balloon is what is turned off and the white portion of our image is what is turned on. And unfortunately, what we want actually, I'll just delete the Statue of Liberty. Unfortunately, what we want is actually the inverse of this, but we've already played around with the inverse quite a bit, so we can just use the inverse here. And what I'll do is I'll click invert on the bottom here, and our balloon pops up because now it is turned on in accordance with the mask, and the background is what is turned off. It is represented in black in our mask. Gary asks, when you select a color with a magic wand, it looks like it'll select that color everywhere in the image, i.e. a bunch of tree branches to be removed. Yeah, so when you click on your image, it's an automated function. So when you click on that color, what you're saying to ACDSee with at least the magic wand tool is, hey, select colors exactly like this one. And then when you have connected turned on, for example, if there is a color that was in with the range, roughly within the threshold range you select, that's not that exact color, but it's like, say you have green and then you have yellowy green, we'll also include that yellowy green. Whereas if you have it turned off, it'll just include the green. So when you use the magic wand tool, it's an automated function that searches for that color in relation to your selection. Okay. So now we have our landscape image, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to combine the magic wand tool with our selection that we had just made. And you'll notice that in the bottom of our image here, we still have a moon being presented to us right there, and a little bit of this dome area here. So we're going to turn these off in our image by actually using the brush tool this time. So I'm going to click on the brush tool. And what I want to do is I want to turn these elements off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my foreground color black. And what that's going to do is it's going to enable me to brush out these elements with black. Now, these elements can still be brushed on again using the white function, right? I can just go back and forth by using these tools to brush on and off over this mask here, which again is showcasing that non-destructiveness, right? So there we have it. We have our image all cleared out of visual information with the exception of my balloon here. And what we might do is we might zoom in on the balloon and let's just see if we did a fairly good job in our selection. It looks like we did okay. I might turn my feathering all the way off and just check the edges to make sure that they're not super blue on the edge. So I'll just go through and get rid of these little dots. And actually what we can also do is we can alternate our color back and forth to just clean up any edges that we're missing. All we're doing is brushing on and off the edges here. It looks okay. I could have maybe refined the edge a little bit, but it's a pretty good selection, I'd say. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually take an image and we're going to place it beneath this image in the same way we were doing with blank layers earlier. Let's just give you an example to begin with. Let's just take our little blank layer button at the bottom right-hand corner here, click add. And what we'll do is we'll fill this layer with that same red color we had earlier. So if I fill it, again, this layer is on top, so it is taking priority and it is what is presented to me. But if I pull it to the bottom, you can see that now it's just my balloon that exists over top of it. And so Gary, when you were talking about removing objects in photos, you can see that, I mean, in this case, we didn't necessarily remove an object, but what we did was we hid the rest of our sky from view. So this is an effective way to remove, if we're considering those objects using the masking function, right? So let's take our sky image that we're going to replace in the background here, because we don't want our background to just be this egregious red color. So I'll just delete this layer. And I'm going to take this sky image that I see in my film strip here, and I'll drag it onto my layer panel. Keeping in mind, I can also do this by clicking on the add a file as a layer button that's right there. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to resize this image so it fits nicely with the frame of the original image. And I'm going to commit the layer. And I'll just take this landscape image, right? And I'll just drag and drop it beneath my balloon. And so I have done a job of combining, right? In this case, my landscape image with the balloon that has been masked above it. I'm not in love with the edges on this. I think I could have improved that. Probably there's two ways that I could have improved that: by making a manual selection with the brush tool, or by when I had my active selection, I could have refined the edges on it. But one of the nice things that I can do is maybe I can play around slightly with the feathering on the edge. I'll feather that mask as Roger just mentioned. And I think what I could do too is I could actually just add an effect overlay, like a photo effect over this image. And I could apply that photo effect just to the layer beneath it. Oops. But that's sort of getting ahead of myself here. I'll just play around with this feathering layer first. I like a gentle feather like that. Let's zoom out again. That's a bit better. And then what I could do is I could warm that layer using white balance. And if I zoom in, and I could play around with these white balance values. The neat thing about white balance and adjustment layers, as you can see here, when I go to add them, and notably, they have their own mask, right? So I can work with that mask in the same way I've been working with layers. So if I zoom out and I want to apply this white balance adjustment only to the balloon, well, I could do that. I could actually erase the remainder. I could erase the parts of this mask that I don't like. The other thing I can do with a adjustment layer that also has a mask is you can see that there's this little diamond icon that appears to the left of the actual mask itself and the adjustment. And what that diamond icon does, let's crank this to get a really, there we go, to get a really strong effect, is that diamond actually clips this adjustment specifically to the image layer that appears beneath it. So when I click this icon here, it's going to do this cool effect that is applied just to the layer that is next to it on the order list. If I was to take this white balance and move it beneath the balloon, you can see that because it's clipped to the landscape image right there, it's being applied to adjust it versus just the balloon. So that clipping function enables me to have this applied globally to all the image layers that appear beneath it. And this is only really relevant now more than ever because of the fact that we have a transparency and a mask in our second image. If it was just being applied to one image, for example, well, that's just going to feel like any other photo effect, right? But it's in conjunction with a new image layer that has been masked, that now I get to have some fun with this clipping function. I can clip it specifically to layers. And I can like find the warmth on this that I think fits the image. I think it's just around somewhere around there. You know, it's definitely, it should be warmer than the original balloon by a good measure. Something that fits that area. And if I really wanted to be precise, what I could do is I could go in and I could take my brush tool and I could work my way around using the black foreground picker. I could just try to take out those elements to sort of match it perfectly with the layer beneath it. It sort of homogenize it. When we have an active selection, I'll just drag and drop another of the same layer onto my layer order here. When I have an active selection, in this case, the background, right? What I can do is I can go to select and refine. And what refine does is it allows me to shift the edge outwards or inwards. And with this balloon, maybe I would shift it in slightly inwards. So that way I'd avoid that blue edge that had appeared and maybe feather it slightly. And that would produce a different selection. Okay, so that covers a whole bunch of functions. So we've talked about the very layer basics. Layer order matters, right? We talked about the layer functions like opacity and the actual hide and show button. We also talked about blending. Then we transitioned to talking about the basics of masking, right? We talked about masking these colors that we were working with earlier. We talked about masking using the brush tool and the fill tool. And then we sort of transitioned and we started talking about masking in relation to an image like this balloon image here that we'd actually want to mask out and conjunction and add to a new image, right? Add to this landscape image. And by masking, what we're doing is we're taking elements away from our image and we're adding other elements. We're using layer order in conjunction with masking to create a composition image. Now, I don't think we're going to have time to cover actions today, which is too bad, but it'll be a topic for a new workshop. This is a probably, as far as ACDSee goes, this is a very creative tool. Using masking enables you to combine images in the way that photographic artists do, not just photographers editing their images. This is a somewhat of a more complicated process. And you all did a very good job of following along, especially in relation to some of those questions about how it would interact with that layer order. I kind of want to just open up to any other additional questions that I wasn't able to cover. Masking with gradients. I don't do it very often, but I guarantee you probably could. Okay, we'll cover that and then we'll cover Owen's question here. Let's first of all try masking with a gradient. I've never done it before. But let's take our balloon image here. Let's just delete these. And what I'll do is I'll take my mask and I'll take gradient and I'll just use a linear gradient and see, yeah, it sure works. So Albert, you certainly can mask with a gradient here. So it's sort of similar to the way that we would use opacity. But in this way, it's presented a sort of a linear gradient here. And actually what we could do is we could change it to radial gradient, and we could probably just mask in just the balloon, I'd imagine here, or out in this case. We'll just invert this momentarily. I mean, this might look a little bit hokey because of the feathering and that sort of thing. Oops, I'll commit, and then I'll just invert it. So yeah, you can certainly mask with gradients to answer your question, Albert. Gary said, gotta leave, mind blown, amazing, fascinating software presentation. You're most welcome, Gary. I'm glad you got a lot out of it. Otto asked, how do you add text? Well, let's answer Owen's question first before I get to yours, Otto. Can you quickly show how to copy balloon and paste onto the same background? Okay, let's see if we can do that. I'll just delete this mask. So we can copy a selection, Owen. So if I have my selection of my balloon here, okay, so I'm going to go through and I'm going to make, and this time I'm actually going to make a different form of selection. I'm going to make a smart brushing selection. Smart brushing allows me to just select the parts that I brush and nothing more. Oh, this is going to be a bit complicated with all the colors. Okay, so we'll do it this way. I'll do around the image. Maybe this isn't going to save us any time. Let me think about this. Yeah, maybe. There we go. Let's make a smart brush of that. And then I'll go through and I'll turn smart brushing off. And I'll just go around the edge of my image. And I'll just cover it all, just brush it all. So what I'm going to do here, Owen, is I'm just selecting, I'm just making a selection of the sky because I'm going to plan on inverting it in a moment here. So there we go, selection, and I'll go to invert. And so we have my balloon. It's crude, but you get the idea. So what I can do is I can actually copy this selection. So I'll copy that selection. And then what I can do is I can also make that mask, like we said earlier. And the other thing I can do is I think what I can do is I can actually just copy the layer itself. And I can paste, oops, that's copying the mask. Discard, copy the layer, should be able to copy the layer. Or maybe what I could do is I could just copy that. There we go. Yeah, I'd still have to interact with the mask over this image, but I can copy parts of my image like that. I mean, the fastest way to do this obviously would be to take my landscape image and just duplicate it. And then I could move the duplicated file, right? So all I did there was click on the image and duplicate it, and click on the move tool and move the duplication and commit the duplication. So you can copy the balloon and paste it in that way by interacting non-destructively here. You can also, I think you should be able to just copy a selection and paste a selection. In this case, cancel, discard. This is a more nuanced element. But so if I was to take my first landscape image here and make a radial selection of the balloon, click Control and paste, it'll make a copy of that part of my image too. And then it's presented to us as a new layer. And then you would have to do the function of masking it the same if you wanted that mask to apply to that blue area there. But just Control C, Control V will copy a part of an image layer. Alternatively, like I said, make a good selection of your image and duplicate it and then move it to functionally copy the balloon. No pasting needed, I suppose, in that case. Owen, does that answer your question? There's a couple different methods. Awesome, you're welcome. Okay, going back to Otto's question. How do you add text as an overlay? Okay, what I can do is I can go up to the text tool here, which is up at the top. And what that does is when I go to click on text and add text, for example, oh, that's a very small text. Let me increase the size a lot. There we go. So say balloon, right? What I can do is I can place that text and then move it. And as you can see, the text has been added as its own layer, right? This allows me to move and position the text in relation to where the image is. So I'm just taking my text and I'm moving it. and I'll commit the layer. If at any point I wanted to adjust the text, I would just go back up to the text tool and I could change the font, for example. So let's go to DIN. I'll change the font to DIN. I can increase the font size to say 500. And then I'll reposition it in relation to my image. And then I have this mask. I can mask this as well. So I can take this text, add a mask. I can feather, I guess that wouldn't change much, but I can take my brush tool, for example, and I can draw portions of my text away, or I can interact with it in the same way I did any other layer. I can also, if you want, I can apply a blend mode. So if I can apply a overlay method with this text in relation to the background, right? So I'm using this text and it's been, I have an overlay blend mode applied, or maybe hard light or soft light to the image beneath it. Now, Otto, does that answer your question in regards to how do you add text as an overlay? Just let me know. Awesome, great, okay. Kieran's question, very good, thank you, lots more to come. Awesome, yeah, we'll cover actions maybe in the next workshop. Also, if you have any suggestions for what you'd like the next workshop to be on, please let me know. Albert, great, you're most welcome. Manfred asked, how do you refine the edge of the balloon again? It was a little quick. Yeah, sure, okay, let's do this again. I'll just delete my balloon text layer and I'll delete my layer mask. So to make a refinement, we need to make a selection, Manfred. So what I'll do is I'll click my magic wand tool and we'll select the sky. And I'm just going to go around and select the sky. Now I don't want to select the sky, I want to select the balloon. So I'm going to invert my selection. That's just an easier way to make a selection. Okay. So to make a refinement, we need an active selection. Would you agree that we have an active selection? From here, I would go to select, and there's a tool under select. You'll notice that there's a bunch of different tools here. I can select all, I can deselect, I can inverse like we did earlier. I can delete selected pixels, I can smart erase, I can apply a luminance color range, I can make a channel selection, etc. I can use the new selection basket. What I can also do here is I can go to refine. And by refine, what that does is it enables me to shift the edge outwards or inwards, which will allow me to adjust what I've selected. And I also can highlight that and feather it slightly. So if I wanted to bring that inwards and feather it, I can do that, or I can bring it outwards if I wanted to select more of the range around it. And that helps me make a accurate selection. I think if we even just pull it in slightly from 0, which I think is the default, to minus like 10, then it gets rid of that blue edge. You'll notice that a couple of the blue parts of my image were selected with the brush. So what I can do is I can just go in and fix that actually with the brush selection tool. So I can just go into brush selection and get those as I go through and make sure that they're added to my selection. Yeah, so that's how refine edge works. And then when I go to make a mask, obviously I can clean that up to using the brush tool. So if there's any part I wanted to catch, like this one, for example, all I would need to do is use the white foreground picker in conjunction with the brush. And now that it's not a selection, I just use the regular brush tool and go through and I can add any details out that I was missing previously. And I can refine this using the brush tool. So if I wanted to hide that blue portion, all I would do is go through and hide that. And when I'm making really accurate selections, this is what I would do. I would go through and manually go through and make sure that I'm selecting the portions that I want and just alternating between the white and black brushes over top of my mask. Manfred, does that answer your question in regards to refining? Awesome. Okay, after Manfred's question was Dick, thank you for this. Appreciate it. You're most welcome, Dick. I'm glad you got a lot out of it. Bonita commenting on the rain in Florida. Fair enough. Susan, can you shrink the size of the new balloons? Yeah. So earlier when we made a copy of the balloon, right, what I can do is I can duplicate my balloon. I can go to the move tool. I can move it, but also within the move tool, I can actually use the bounding box to make the balloon much smaller. So I've made a copy of my balloon here. I can put it in the foreground if I wanted. I can duplicate this smaller balloon and I can move it, and I can actually put it in the background. So I can put it beneath my other balloon. So as you can see, note that I needed to erase the foreground element in that selection, but you can go through and you can add them to the foreground or to the background. I can have a whole swash of balloons just floating in the air here. Yeah, so Susan, you can shrink the balloons. That shrink function is within the move tool. So that's what enables me to move or shrink the file smaller and smaller. Susan, does that answer your question? Awesome. All right, what other questions do we got here? Thank you, Owen, you're welcome. Roger, can you combine layers into one? Yeah, okay, so if I say I wanted to combine two balloons, so I got balloon number one, and I'll just duplicate this once I've committed it, and I'll duplicate it. I'll combine these two balloons into one layer. Actually, this is pretty cool. So I'll take these two layers, landscape 109, and I'm going to do the merge function. So merge layer down. And so what it'll do is it'll create a new layer. It will have removed the masks based on what information was visible and what information wasn't visible. And now they're treated as one object. Just a note that when you merge layers down, this is a destructive function in the sense that you can no longer get back your two layers that you had earlier. But I did merge them into one object. And what I can do is I can add a new mask. And now that they're treated as one object, I can actually remove that ugly foreground section of that down the bottom down here and remove the moons. So now they're sort of treated as one object, and their mask, their new mask applies to both of them. Roger, does that answer your question? Awesome. So merge layer down is this button right here, and that merges them into one object. It is destructive. Okay, let's see other questions. Auto, yes. Bruce, will this workshop be available later online? Yeah, it will be on our YouTube page. I'm going to try to get that done for the end of the day and upload it there. If not, it'll be on there tomorrow. Albert, very good. Thanks. You're most welcome, Albert. Ryan, text layer as a mask. Text layer, as I mentioned earlier, had a mask. Did you catch that, Ryan? Did that answer your question from earlier? Let me know. Did you answer it? Oh, no, it was just a moment ago, Ryan. Okay, I'll go over it one more time. So when I add a text layer, so I add a text layer, and there's my text, okay? And all I'll do is once I'm happy with the location of that text, I'll just commit it, okay? And so text can be added as a layer. And earlier your question was, can you add a mask to a text layer? You can. I'll add a layer mask. And I will mask out the X in text. So it says tet. So there is a mask of text. Okay. So yes, it does. Let's see here. Oh, there's so many questions. Okay. Interested in a workshop about develop mode? Elaine, can you go to our YouTube page? We just covered develop mode in 2 workshops. Yeah, they're first and foremost on our workshop. Actually, maybe while I'm talking to you, I will get them for you on our YouTube page. So for everyone, this is our YouTube page. And if you go to playlists, let's see if I can find it here for you. So there's 2 workshops called manage mode from the ground up and develop mode from the ground up. So that was in relation to develop mode. Yeah, okay, let's see here. Okay, oh man, lots to talk about. Okay, let's just see. So please notify me of your next workshop. Albert, if you subscribe to ACDSee, like in that if you get emails from us, you can go to our newsletter and sign up for that. And that's where we send out our workshop notifications. Otherwise, you can find them on the workshop page as you already did. It's just under our community tab, I want to say, on our website. The fastest way is just to sign up for the newsletter, and then that way you get updates with every workshop that we do, which should be bi-weekly. So it's every 2 weeks, or sorry, bi-monthly is what I'm not gonna. I can't do two a week. Thanks, Adam. It's been a great tutorial, very comprehensive. I'll look forward to watching a tutorial again. Yeah, it'll be up on our YouTube page in a couple days. Interested in a workshop about develop mode, as I said, Elaine, check that out. Albert, please notify me. Patrick, thank you very much. You're most welcome, Patrick. Thank you for participating. Christopher, thanks, Adam. I'm going to be using this in my next group project. Awesome. Excited to see how that turns out. Feel free to email me with a pic. aprice@acdsystems.com is my my email. Let's see here. There's more. Excellent. Thanks. You're welcome. Thanks so much for today's webinar. This is Brian. The expectations examples I'm asking were so helpful. Looking for the next one. I'm glad that you found it helpful, Brian. You're most welcome. Susan, thank you. Very nice presentation. You're welcome, Susan. Roger, yes, that was in response to an earlier question. Owen, cheers, Adam. Always brilliant. Going to hammer this one out, become easier. Stay safe. Yeah, you're most welcome. I'm glad. I think the red-blue way of explaining this has been the most comprehensive I've done so far. So hopefully that was helpful. Bill Rose says, on another topic, when sorting images, can the resulting custom sort be saved? So when images are transferred to another computer using ACDSee, they appear in the same order automatically. Bill, can you send me an email in relation to that question? I could probably get a more comprehensive answer to you. My brain's just a bit fried after this presentation, but I would love to answer that for you. So please email me. Kostas said, the presentation is very good. Don't know if I'll have the time for the next one. Can you please make one example with actions? I see. You won't have time for the next one. Unfortunately, Kostas, actions is very big. It's almost as big as what we covered today. I don't think I can do a quick presentation for you. But we'll have it up on our YouTube page. So if you want to check that one out at your leisure, it'll be on there. Dan says, thank you so much for this workshop. I've learned a lot today. Looking forward to reviewing it. You're most welcome, Dan. Thank you for participating as well. Gord, great session. You're welcome. Kieran, thank you. Ryan, we talked about your question. Ray and Tony, you're welcome. Bud, you're welcome. John, awesome. Can you make a text box a background color? Can you make the text box a background color? Right. So can you make an overlay? That is a complicated question. My gut reaction to that is yes, you can. It's a bit more complicated than you'd think. And it's not as easy as in some other programs. I have the words text here. I'm going to highlight them. Let's see if it'll let me highlight them. Commit the layer. Let's see if it'll let me. The request option cannot be performed on the text layer. There we go. Select that layer. And then if I was to select my landscape image here and duplicate it and mask with text, okay, I think what should happen is the word text can be a background color in the sense that I'm using my background to, all I did was select the text itself and then apply that as a mask, okay? Text can also be made into any other color. I'm pretty sure this isn't your question, but when I make a text here and I can turn it to any color I want using the text color tool. So I can just adjust this text color. So the first one, though, is to make an actual selection of the text itself, rasterize that selection, and then make a mask with it. Does that answer your question? Can you make the text box a background color? And Ryan asked the same question very shortly after, actually. David said, very informative. Thank you so much. Gary said, thanks, Adam, head spinning with all the information. You're welcome for the head spin. Alan, how much of this is the same as previous versions, specifically 2020 and Ultimate? A lot of what we talked about is the same. We didn't cover the selection basket today because I think it would just add another level of complexity. But the selection basket enables us to save these selections and masks in a hub, which is so useful. It just didn't really come up because we're just trying to sort of sort out the basics today. But yeah, so the selection basket is new to 2021. Yeah, channel selection, things like that. Go, Lane. Roger said, can you copy paste? Oh yeah, we talked about that. Victor said, thank you, Adam, for excellent demonstration of the layers concept. You're most welcome, Victor. Brian, can you type on the mask layer with text, like the black letters would turn off the mask layer below it? Can you type on the mask layer with text? No, you cannot. That one you can't do, I don't believe. Nigel, is there a comprehensive list of the functions and where the icons are? The icons being these icons up at the top. Is there a comprehensive list of the functions? I believe if you go to, what help contents do we have for this, I wonder? Search toolbar. Tools. I mean, all of the tools are listed here, but I don't know how comprehensive. I mean, it's comprehensive. It's just not easy to access. Email me, Nigel. I'll have an answer for you. And again, my email is aprice@acdsystems.com for anyone who needs it. Waterham, thank you so much. Cheryl, thank you. Nadar, thank you. And yes, it'll be on YouTube, likely, hopefully before the end of the day, if not tomorrow. Joel, you're welcome. Larry, you're welcome. I was thinking black text in a white text box. Black text in a white text box. I mean, you can create that using shapes. So I can add a new layer. I can create a shape that is, in this case, a white box. And I can add black text over top of that said white box. And these are treated as two different objects. So as you can see, the layer 2 is our box and the text layer is our text layer. And I can add black text. It's sort of not a combined function, but hopefully it answers your question. Gary asked, does all you did here work if the image is a raw file? So we covered that earlier. When you open up an image in edit mode, it basically holds the raw file as is. And what it's going to do is it's going to create a, in edit mode, it's converted to a TIFF or a JPEG. I can't remember which one exactly, but it is converted to that. And then so when you go to save that file, you're working with a lossy file at that point, an editable file type, a writable file type, because raw files are not writable. So you can't actually adjust anything to a raw file. And so the way that we get around that in edit mode is by creating a high quality TIFF file or JPEG file that you're actually interacting with, and then you save as an ACDSee file, which is using that JPEG. In develop mode, it's a little bit different. Develop mode, you can edit a raw file. It's just that the adjustments that you've made are saved in a sidecar file. So those adjustments are saved in a file that is referenced whenever you open up that raw image in ACDSee. So both edit mode and develop mode answer that problem in different ways. Bud, can these workshops? Yes, we've talked about that. The raw file won't be overridden on the save, correct? Yes. Yeah, I don't believe you can overwrite a raw file. Because if we go to a raw file, let's just try it out just to make sure. I'll just open up this random folder of raw files. go into edit mode. Let's just change the exposure and I'll try to save it. File save. It prompts me to save as, right? I can't even overwrite it. I have to save it as a different file format. So in this case, when I go to save this image, it prompts me as to save it as an ACDSee file, but I could easily save it as a JPEG or a TIFF or some other file. So when I save a raw file, I'm always going to get this save as message, right? I'll never be able to save over that original raw file. Hopefully that answers your question, Gary. Bonita asked, would like to have one entire lesson on text added to images. Oh, okay, cool. I would like to do that. I like to add text for slideshows. Okay, especially when showing names or flowers or locations. Fair enough. And to ensure the text will show in the slideshow. As I mentioned in another question, when I've added text, it wants to save as an ACDSee if I do this in layers masking. And then it did not show the same image in the slideshow. I need to convert to a JPEG for the image to show. Okay, you can do both. Okay, so I'd love to do this for you. I'll write a note that we'll do. Actually, that's something we can talk about with actions too. So in the next workshop, but we'll definitely have text added to images. What I would do in your case, Bonita, is I would add the text to your image, save it as an ACDSee file, because that way you can go in and you can adjust it in the future. And then what I would also do is just save as another file that's a JPEG. So if you're like, hey, I want to add the word, I want to add some text to my image, I would just save it as both files. And then that way you have the JPEG that you need, but then you also have the editable file that allows you to change the text in the future. Does that answer your question? Alternatively, too, I will do a whole lesson entirely on adding text, especially if that's something that interests people.